Well, many of us are returning to our workplaces as the pandemic subsides in Wisconsin, but tonight we're uncovering new records showing hundreds of workers who were never sent home and complained about safety concerns.
And on top of that, they got little to no help from the feds. Investigative reporter Naomi Coles brings us those reports.
Every dot on this map behind me represents a workplace where employees or the public became so concerned about COVID safety that they reached out to OSHA. There are almost 400 of these dots, all filed between October and March at the height of the pandemic. Many are clustered in Milwaukee and right here in Madison. But once OSHA knew, what did they do about it?
Too many frontline workers were exposed to COVID needlessly.
And employers who are just using employees as labor and not as people are missing the point.
It's not acceptable.
Out of nearly 400 complaints to OSHA from October through early March, just 49, or 12%, were followed up with an inspection. OSHA said the rest were handled through an informal procedure that only involves talking to the employer or mailing them a letter.
This pandemic showed a light on so many things that are wrong in our workplaces.
When you compare the stories, one submitted by employees in the complaints and how their employers responded, they're often very different. We asked 5 workplaces about complaints filed against them. Only 2 responded, and both saying no one worked while sick and proper protocols were followed. The vast majority of the complaints are about unsafe or unenforced COVID safety policies. About a third involved sick employees, and dozens are from employees saying workers were being asked or allowed to work while sick with COVID or its symptoms. Another trend, employees saying they weren't told about positive cases at work. Others complain about poor masking practices.
And gives us an opportunity to make steps to make workplaces safe for workers. And that includes sick time without disciplinary action.
Because it's not just worker concerns that they're supposed to be addressing, but also the public that are accessing their restaurants or their plants. So it's a really wide-reaching problem. We haven't seen any type of regulatory actions taken against companies that are clearly in violation of those OSHA statutes.
A few industries like healthcare, food processing, and restaurants stood out, including this ongoing case into a Beloit restaurant opened 2 days after a News 3 investigation into a COVID death and the working conditions surrounding it.
You're expected to do your job, period.
But all kinds of workplaces across the state faced these issues.
It's startling to me how many industries experienced this. It affected every population of employee, it affected every type of industry.
Nationwide, a Wall Street Journal investigation found a similar pattern. COVID complaints were rarely inspected and most often were closed without investigation after just talking to employers. OSHA struggled to meet the new demands of infectious disease in the workplace, often leaving workers vulnerable. And now as we move out of the pandemic and back to a more normal workplace, labor advocates and attorneys are advocating for larger protections, like making sure workers feel safe to take sick time.
But it continues and remains shocking that more wasn't done to address employee concerns about real problems in the workplace.
And there needs to be wholesale look at the changes that are needed to have a safe workplace.
Part of the lack of action from the feds is because OSHA has no formal guidance for addressing infectious disease in the workplace. The Wisconsin AFL-CIO says that's what has to change.
And OSHA needs to issue new guidelines for infectious diseases in general that really left workers without real protection.
Under the Biden administration, OSHA is ramping up enforcement of virus safety procedures, increasing inspections and fines. But the gap that advocates noted about no formal guidance for infectious disease, that still puts a question mark on long-term change. For News 3 Investigates, I'm Naomi Coles.
And if you've got a tip, you can reach our team at News 3 Investigates at WISCTV.com.